wanted to go over PMI traps this month is because PMI loves to trip people up on the exam. They're aware that there are certain groups of terms and concepts and frameworks, methodologies even, that tend to confuse people if they don't have those clarifying details. You know, that phrase, the devil is in the details. Sometimes it takes just knowing, one little thing to be able to say, okay, this is that versus this. And so that's what I want to show you today. We'll go through about 8 or so terms and concepts. I'm calling this the Versus Edition. We're going to do kind of a compare and contrast of 8 different sets of terms or concepts that often get confused. And then we'll go through 3 exam style questions, some formula questions, and then some I just want to kind of walk you through what to look out for on the exam and what kind of strategies to use. If you guys have any questions, feel free to unmute. Of course, there's only about 5 of us, so I don't mind if you guys unmute and just interrupt me, or you can also put your question in the chat. I'm happy to stop and take a look. All righty, let's start with validate scope and control quality. And for each one, if you guys can let me know if this is something that you do struggle with or you have a pretty good idea of what it is. It just gives me an idea of what people are kind of battling over in their prep journey. When it comes to validate scope, I want you guys to know that validate scope is all about the customer, okay? And you'll see that quality, control quality is all about processes. But validate scope is where the customer accepts the deliverables, okay? When you see the words customer and accept, know that it's a scope thing. Know that it's a validation thing. It's not quality. It's not a monitor and control. It's a validate scope process. Okay, they're accepting the deliverables, which officially closes out the execution portion of the project. It happens with the customer, or it can happen with the sponsor. So the project sponsor is kind of the voice of the customer on project. Remember, the sponsor is the one that's paying for the project. They are the one justifying the project. They're telling the business, this is why we need to do this project. This is why we need this new service, this new software, this new transition. And so they're kind of the liaison between the customer and the actual organization. And so the sponsor can also accept deliverables and validate scope. Again, this is where you formally sign off on deliverables. So the customer will say, I accept this, I sign off, and that kind of closes out the working portion of the project. And your output is always going to be accepted deliverables. Accepted deliverables. Versus control quality. Now, this is focused more so on processes. So internal inspections. If you see a question that says, during testing, the team found 2 defects in the product, what process did they just finish? It's not going to be validate scope, because remember, validate scope is all about deliverables. Okay, it's most likely going to be a quality thing. Those defects and those failures come from internal inspections. It's done by the project team. So the developers, the people who are working and actually doing the project work, that's who does quality inspection. It's not done by a third party. It's not done by the customer. It's done internally within the organization, within the project team specifically. Control quality verifies correctness. So it's looking for, is this product functioning correctly? Is it meeting compliance requirements, right? Is it accurate according to specifications? It could be, if you're dealing with cars, it could be speed, safety, regulatory specs. If you're dealing with software, it could be, is our customer interface the way that we want it? Are the words spelled correctly? This is where quality control comes in, and control quality, the formal process of it. And the output is going to be verified deliverables. So that's where validate scope and control quality differ. With validate scope, it's customer-based, and you have accepted deliverables as an output. Control quality is process-based, inspection-based, and your output is verified deliverables. And it's really, this is really the detail that you want to remember: accepted versus verified. That's a very common PMI trap. And so again, here's the trap. If you see a question that says, the team just demoed a product or reviewed a product, it's not going to be an accepted deliverable. It's not necessarily validate scope. Okay, you want to look for either accepted deliverables or verified deliverables, and try to see if the question is focusing on the customer or the process. All right, next one. Communications management versus stakeholder engagement. This is another tricky one because there's a fine line between stakeholder communication and stakeholder engagement. And often when we see communication questions on the exam, they're referring to the stakeholders. So we tend to automatically think, okay, that's engagement. Not necessarily the case all the time. Communications management focuses on information, meaning who needs what information, when do they need it, how do they need it, how do we package it, what format of communication are we using? Email? Is it face to face? Is it going to be meetings? Is it going to be focus groups? This is all comms management. It can involve stakeholders and the project team and executives and the customer. Okay, it's not just stakeholder communication. Stakeholder engagement focuses more on influence. What type of stakeholders do we have on the project? What's their power level? How should we keep them engaged? Are they cooperative? Are they resistant? Those are all factors of stakeholder engagement, and it goes beyond communication, and it looks into expectations of stakeholders, characteristics of stakeholders, identifying stakeholders, that sort of thing. And so when your question focuses more on the relationship, like a stakeholder is pushing back because they're not getting enough communication, that could be an engagement issue. Doesn't mean it's a straight communications issue. It really just depends on what the question is asking. And so really focus on the wording in the question. If it's relationship based, if it's influence based, if it's resistance based, if it's, a stakeholder is not supportive, that's mostly stakeholder engagement. If the question is strictly about information, not getting information, not getting it on time, not getting the right information, that's more comms management. And that's what I just talked through. Oftentimes people think when a stakeholder is unhappy, it's a communication issue. Most times it's actually a stakeholder engagement. Next one, the issue log versus the risk register. So I want to note for the exam, both of these are uncontrolled documents. That means that they can be updated at any time by anyone on the project. It doesn't need a change request. You don't need any formal processes to add something to the issue log or the risk register. The difference, however, is the issue log only records current actual problems, meaning, risks are things that we think might happen, so we have to plan for them. Issues are things that have actually happened. They're happening now. We need to act fast. They're in our face. We have to deal with it right away. And it often requires immediate action. One thing I don't have on here is when you add an issue to the log, you always want to assign someone from the project team to complete it, to follow up on it, to make sure the issue is resolved. Okay. Overall, the project manager is responsible for the entire issue log, maintaining it, making sure the issues are resolved, making sure that they're being followed up on, that there's resolutions happening. The project manager overall is responsible, but virtually anyone can update the issue log. A risk, however, is a future uncertainty. These are things that we don't know that are actually going to happen, but we think they might based on our project factors and other considerations. The risks on a project always need some sort of analysis. And so if you remember the process grid, or if you've looked at that 49 process grid, you'll see the risk knowledge area has a lot of planning processes. It includes identify risks. It includes perform qualitative analysis, perform quantitative analysis, and then plan risk responses. And so each risk needs to be analyzed to say, okay, how likely is this risk going to happen or may happen on this project? And then what's the impact if it actually does, right? How much is this risk going to cost us? What damage can this risk actually do to the project or to the people? Is it a regulatory risk, right? Can the project get shut down? Can the organization get fined? These are all things that should be added to the risk register as potential risks. And then once they actually happen, they're added to the issue log. Now, the trick here is, again, I see a lot of clients mix up risks and issues. You might see a question that says, the vendor has delayed their deliverable by 2 weeks, so this will push back the actual project. That's an issue. You want to add that to the issue log. There's no need to add it to the risk register because it's already happening. That's where I see a lot of clients get mixed up. So just remember, risk is potential, issue is actually happening now, and it needs to get resolved. Alrighty, the next slide, we're going to talk about 4 different risk types here. And now there are more risk types there, but these are the 4 that often get kind of mixed up. And so we'll walk through these one by one. Mitigate risk is when you try to reduce the impact or the probability that a risk may happen. And so you're doing things to, maybe we analyze this risk and said it might cost us $10,000 if this risk happens, if we don't do things the right way and we get fined. Well, to mitigate that risk, we're not going to do it that way. We're going to go about it another way so that we don't get fined at all. Or so if we do, get fined, it's a much lesser infraction instead of the $10,000. That's a mitigation act. That's how you kind of reduce the impact. You don't eliminate it right away or all the way, but you're just reducing the chances that it will happen or reducing how much damage it can actually do. Now, avoid risk. This is where things get a little tricky. Avoid risk is when you eliminate the threat entirely. It doesn't mean that you ignore it. It doesn't mean that you just look over it. It means that you're avoiding it somehow. You're taking an action to eliminate the threat. And so let's say we're building a 18-story building and an inspector comes in and says, oh, your plumbing is not in the right space, right? Your pipes are a little bit to the left, not to the right. Well, to avoid that risk, we're going to have the pipes redone, right? We're going to put the pipes in the place that they should be. And that's us avoiding the risk. We didn't ignore it, but we took action to eliminate the threat entirely from the projects. Okay. Transfer risk is when you transfer, literally, you shift the ownership from one party to the next. And so that's where insurance policies come in, right? That's a transferred risk. You're saying, I don't want to be held liable if something happens on this project. So we're going to hire an insurance company to manage this risk for us so that if it does happen, the impact isn't felt, right? The probability may still be there, but we don't have to worry about it because the insurance party is taking care of it. We have a warranty to cover ourselves if this thing does happen. So anytime you see a third party involved when it comes to risk management, it's most likely a transferred risk situation. Accept risk is when you just don't do anything. It's when you ignore it, you just kind of monitor it. As a project manager, you might think, okay, that might happen, but it's not really, a front-facing issue right now, or we may not have to worry about it until later on. Or maybe one of those things where you kind of have to consider it, but it most likely won't happen. So you're not even thinking about it. You just kind of wait till we cross that bridge, if we ever need to cross that bridge. And so the trap comes with avoid and accept risk mostly. Avoid risk means eliminating the threat. So you're still taking action to eliminate the threat. Whereas accept the risk is when you do nothing. You're just kind of waiting for things to work out or work themselves out. And I see a lot of candidates confuse these two, accept and avoid. And so even if you see the word avoid in the question, it doesn't mean that the risk response type is going to be avoid risk. It's most likely going to be mitigate. They're avoiding it by reducing the impact, or they're going to transfer it. They're going to avoid the risk altogether by hiring this insurance party or getting this warranty for the project. Any questions on risk type? I know we have a few more people that have joined. If not, I'll keep on trucking. All right, next one, we're going to take a shift towards Agile for this next one. So product backlog and sprint backlog, definitely 2 terms that you need to know for the exam. For those of you who don't know, the exam is probably over 50% Agile, if not mostly Agile. I think PMI has published that it's 50% Agile. I think it's often more because you have Agile questions, you have predictive questions, and then you have hybrid questions, which are going to include some elements of Agile. So you're going to have a lot of Scrum questions, XP questions. Hi, Mariah, thanks for joining. You're going to have a lot of XP questions, a lot of Scrum, a lot of development questions, software development, lifecycle questions. All of that stuff falls under the Agile umbrella. So you'll want to brush up on that area if you haven't studied just yet. So product backlog. This backlog is owned by the product owner. Okay, this is a backlog that basically includes everything that we need to do to create this product. It includes minor things, major things. It can include straight requirements from the stakeholders. It can include user stories. It can include sprints that are called spikes, which are, just give us some time to research this thing before we actually start the work. So the product backlog can be a whole combination of different requirements and features that the customer wants for this particular product. The product owner owns this backlog, meaning if they work directly with the Scrum Master or with the Agile project manager to prioritize it because they are prioritizing it based on what they think the customer will find value in first. Okay, so that's where they own it. Again, it's the entire universe of product needs, and it changes constantly. In Agile, there is no formal change request process. There is no change control board. If a customer requests a change, you just add it to the product backlog, and you wait for the product owner to prioritize those items. And so you may have a backlog of 50 things to do for this product. The product owner will say, okay, move this to the top, move that to the top, move this to the top. And then the team comes in during sprint planning and they say, okay, out of these top 5 or 6 priorities, we have room and capacity to do 2 of them. And that is their sprint backlog. These are the 2 items that they're going to work on for the duration of the sprint, often 2 weeks or 3 weeks. By the way, for the exam, sprints should never be longer than 4 weeks. Just kind of a note there because I did get a question about that. But the sprint backlog is what the team plans, is what the team creates, and they own the sprint backlog. And so you'll often get questions about, a stakeholder wants to prioritize a feature last minute. They want to rush to get it done mid-sprint. The answer is always no. We cannot add items to the sprint backlog in the middle of a sprint. The team has the authority to push back. The Scrum Master or the Agile project has the authority to push back. And oftentimes that is the correct answer. Coach the product owner on, the sprint backlog processes, or coach the product owner on prioritizing the backlog and fit it into a future sprint. But never, ever, ever allow stakeholders on the exam to add things into a sprint in the middle of the sprint. The sprint backlog is locked. So again, we can't be added, oftentimes can't be removed, but sometimes teams, don't get to finish all the tasks. So then they reprioritize for the next sprint. And it contains sprint items along with the sprint plan. Now, sprint plan is just how are we going to get these things done? And so during those sprint planning sessions, the team is saying, these are the items that we're going to do from the backlog. This is how we're going to do it. This is the duration of the sprint. Let's get it done. And then the Scrum Master kind of protects the team for those 2 or 3 weeks to make sure they don't get any interruptions or they don't get kind of bullied into changing the sprint backlog. And now the trap here, again, stakeholders should never be allowed to add things mid-sprint. The team has the authority to push back, and so does the Scrum Master. In fact, according to PMI, they're expected to push back in those situations. Again, on the Agile thought here, product roadmap versus release plan. So again, 2 items, 2 terms that you definitely want to be familiar with for the exam. The product roadmap shows us kind of the where, right? Here's this big product vision. This is what we think we need for, to increase profit or to streamline processes or whatever the end goal is. That's the product vision. It's the big kind of goal of the project. And then you have your product roadmap. So this is telling us how we're going to get there, where things are going to happen on the way, what's the journey going to look like. So it includes major milestones. We're going to start the project here. We'll have phase 1 done here. We'll have this feature done here. We'll do testing on this date. That's a product roadmap. It's showing us where we're going with those major dates along the way. The roadmap is always evolving. So just because, the roadmap was created at the beginning of the project doesn't mean it's set in stone, right? It's not like a baseline on the predictive side. It's evolving. It can change, and it's very high level. So it probably will change at some point. The release plan is a little bit more of a lower level of granularity. This kind of tells us when. When are these things going to happen? When are these features going to be released? And then the next level below that is iteration planning. So it's kind of a hierarchy of planning in the Agile world. But the release plan tells us what features are we going to release at what time. Okay. So is it going to be 2 months out that we'll accept the next features? Is it going to be 3 months out? Are we going to have a new increment of the product in 2 weeks? When are we going to have these things lined out? That's your release plan. And the release plan is not super high level, so there are real dates and real commitments anchored to the release plan. The trap here, really just confusing the two. So just make sure you have a good idea of what a roadmap is. Think bigger, broader, and then a release plan is when you kind of get down into the nitty gritty. By the way, flashcards help a lot with these sort of terms. So if you are confusing some of these, just create flashcards and that repetition will kind of clarify things for you. Sprint review and sprint retrospective, another agile kind of scrum-based group of terms. Sprint review is going to be towards the end of the sprint. And this is where we review the product, right? Whatever the team has been working on for those 2 or 3 weeks, now it's time to bring in the stakeholders, bring in the product sponsor, the product owner, and then the customers. Oftentimes, customers are involved in the sprint review. This is where they get to demo the product, right? Play around with the software, or they get to look at the physical thing or solution that they're building. And then they get feedback. The whole purpose of the review is to say, here's what we created based on what you told us you wanted. What's the feedback? How can we make it better? Did we hit the nail on the head? That's the whole purpose of a sprint review. And they can be quite long in the real world. The last thing I want to mention too is the product backlog adjustment. So again, the product backlog, the bigger, broader one that's owned by the product owner, they opt to go in and reprioritize that all the time. So something that they may have dropped low on the priority list may be raised up to the top during one of these reviews, strictly because the customer said something, right? Just because the customer said, hey, we actually do need this button that we thought wasn't super important. We actually do need that. Can you get that to us sooner than later? And that's where the backlog will be refined. So a lot takes place in these review meetings. Sprint retrospective. This is when the team gets together and kind of says, okay, what did we do right? What did we do wrong? What's working? What's not working? How can we, complete these tasks more effectively? How can we work better together? This is more of a team-focused review. It focuses on their processes, on their behaviors, right? How they handled each other, how they handled the sprint tasks. So oftentimes, stakeholders, product owners, product sponsors are not invited to the retrospective. It's really just a chance for the team to give each other feedback. And anything that they want to change for the next sprint, let's say they don't want to have, 2-hour daily meetings. They want to have an hour meeting. They'll change that for the next sprint, but they'll decide that and be retrospective. They'll kind of commit to it there. The trap here, again, confusing the two. Just because a customer, has feedback doesn't mean that we automatically change the sprint backlog. Some candidates may think it's a retrospective because the feedback comes after the sprints. Even if the customer gives feedback, 2 days after the sprint ends, it's still part of the sprint review. It shouldn't be a part of the sprint retrospective. So retrospective is solely team-based. A review is for everyone to see what the team has been working on. All right, I think this is one of the last ones here. The difference between iterative and incremental. And I threw this in last minute because I noticed that oftentimes either my clients or just people I'm talking to who are studying for the PMP, they have a hard time verbally explaining the difference between iterative and incremental. And I get it, they're very similar. We hear the terms a lot when it comes to Agile, when it comes to hybrid, and there really is a fine line between the both of them. So I just want to make sure that you all have a solid understanding because you will get questions about these terms on the exam. So iterative or iteration of sprints is when you deliver one product at one time. So let's say the project was to build this Yeti. Well, the iteration of this might just be gray, right? It may not have a fancy magnetic lid. It may not have this chrome trimming at the bottom. It may not have this logo. It'll be a very basic version of this cup. That's the first iteration. And then during those sprint reviews that we just talked about, the customer may say, okay, well, we want some color options. We don't like the gray color. Can you give us red, black, and blue? And so the next iteration of this product will include 3 different colors. It may include this chrome trimming. It may include some more fancy features. And the product just gets better and better and better over time. That's an iterative life cycle. Okay. And that's why they're called iterations or sprints, because you're kind of working in these small time boxed periods to deliver one product, but you're doing it very regularly and very quickly, ideally. And so iteration has value, and that's why Agile has adopted it in its methodology. It's meant to give you, start off basic, but you're getting something very regularly. So the customer is kind of going along on the journey with you. Whereas incremental, you have this one big product that you want to deliver, but you're delivering it in pieces. And so instead of delivering this whole cup, maybe we start with just the base, right? No handle, no lid, no trimming, just this one base. And we have all the colors that the customer asked for. But that's all. This is the first increment of this product. And then maybe the second increment is when you add a handle. The third increment is when you add the chrome trimming and the logo, right? You're kind of building the product in pieces. That's the main difference between iterative and incremental. Where the confusion comes in is Agile. Agile is a combination of both, right? If you think about Agile, they're delivering bits of pieces of software or bits of pieces of a product in small increments, and they're getting feedback to make it better each time. And so you're kind of doing both methodologies at one time. It's a mixture of both. So Agile in itself is a hybrid methodology, but that's where the confusion comes in. Incremental, you're delivering a full product in pieces. Iterations, you're starting with the basic product and building on it until it becomes the most fabulous product that your customer desires. Any questions there? Anything that I can clarify for these two terms? Feel free to unmute or drop it in the chat. I see someone's typing. Okay, no questions. Awesome. I'll go over MVP. So MVP is a minimally viable product, and you'll most likely get a question about this on the exam. That means that you're delivering kind of the most basic product with the most basic features, but it still works, right? It's still something that the customer can use, right? It's just, it doesn't have all the bells and whistles yet. That's a minimally viable product. That's an MVP. And of course, it improves over time as we get more feedback from the customer. An NBI on the incremental side stands for minimum business increments. Minimum business increment. So again, you're adding a piece of the product to the bigger product for every iteration. And I would definitely suggest knowing the difference between MVP and NBI. The trap here is just confusing the two again. Remember iteration. When you think of iterative, think of iteration, right? Small amounts of work, lots of feedback, lots of sprint reviews, lots of retrospectives. It's all about feedback and making the product better. Whereas incremental, you're just breaking up the work over time. And then, of course, Agile, as I said, is a combination of both. All right. Any questions about any of the concepts that we went over before we switch gears to question strategy? I think we're doing good on time, so I'll keep pushing through. If you do have one, again, just put it in the chat for me. Thank you, LaShonda. All right, so question strategy when it comes to PMI traps. You probably have heard of something called the PMI mindset as you're studying for the PMP. And the PMI mindset is great to have, and in fact, it's vital for passing. But sometimes the answer is not so easy, and it requires you to be able to differentiate between certain terms and concepts. And so along with the PMI mindset, you definitely want to have a solid foundation of those official PMI terms, concepts, frameworks, methodologies, formulas, and that will help you kind of refine the PMI mindset even more, because you'll be able to recognize what's officially a PMI term and what is called a distractor, meaning some made-up word or some made-up phrase that's meant to throw you off during the exam. And so for each question, there's just 3 questions, so we should have plenty of time. But before I give you the answer, I want you all to drop your answer in the chat. That way I can see kind of how you all are thinking, and then we'll discuss the question in detail and I'll show you what the trap is. Okay? First question. Let me know if you choose A, B, C, or D. The question states, you noticed project defects have increased during the last 2 sprints. To understand whether this is part of a larger trend, which artifact should you review? Would that be work performance data, work performance information, work performance reports, or quality metrics? Let me know if you choose A, B, C, or D for this question. And don't be embarrassed if you get the wrong answer. Okay, John says D, quality metrics. Good answer. C or D already. LaShawna says C or D. Any other answers there? Alrighty, the answer is actually B, work performance information. And let's talk about why. So work performance data, information, and reports, another PMI favorite concept. I'm not sure why, but it just kind of is sprinkled in throughout the exam. Work performance data is just raw data. And so to give me an example, I'm studying for the CPMAI, which is the AI and project management certification. And I learned about something called unstructured data. So think about all the data that's available in the world. Let's say you have a collection of videos, you have a collection of spreadsheets, you have a collection of documents, a collection of pictures, you have text messages, physical notes, right? That's all a collection of data. That's work performance data. It's just a collection of different types of data. Hasn't been analyzed yet, hasn't been grouped together, it hasn't been packaged, it hasn't been made to be pretty for the stakeholders. It's just your raw data. And that data comes from all of your execution processes. And so as the project team is working on the actual tasks for the project, they are producing work performance data, right? Just raw numbers, raw updates, raw performance metrics. And then work performance information is when that data gets analyzed, right? So we put some context to it. There's a story behind it now. This is where we find out if there are trends in the data, right? Think about those videos and pictures and text messages. Work performance information is you're actually packaging those things together so that you can try to identify any patterns or any trends or any things that may give you a red flag on the project or that may give you an indication that the project is performing well. That's work performance information, and that's the only one of the 3 that will actually allow you to identify a trend. Okay. Work performance reports is when you make all the data pretty, right? You put it into Tableau, you put it into Power BI, you put it into Excel, you make a pivot table, you make a pretty chart, you make a graph of some sort. That's work performance reports. And that's mostly for the stakeholders' use, right? Stakeholders don't have time to sort through raw data or performance information. They just want the final picture, right? What's the big message that you're trying to tell me in all this data? And then quality metric, that can help you measure how many defects there are per deliverable, how many defects there may be in the process, but it really doesn't have much to do with trends or any sort of one-offs or patterns that might be forming in the projects. All right, so here's the trap. Again, you might want to take a screenshot of this. Work performance data is raw data, has not been processed or packaged together yet. Work performance information, that's data that's been analyzed, okay, that's been kind of put together. And then work performance reports is when you package it and make a full summary and some sort of visualization usually for stakeholders. Questions on this one? Does that get practice for y'all? All right, let's go with the next one. The question reads, a change request to update a system interface has been approved. What should the project manager do next? You're going with A, present the updated deliverable, B, update the scope baseline, C, assign the work to the team, or D, conduct a quality inspection? Take a stab at this one for me. I see some wheels turning in the chat. Come on, don't be nervous. A, B, C, or D. And the change request process is another PMI favorite. Okay, I got 3 Bs. Very nice. The answer is actually going to be C. Now, this is a little bit confusing, I'm sure, because once we see a change request that's been approved, then we can just update everything, right? We can just update our documentation. We can make all the changes that we need to. But PMI has a very specific process of how change requests, specifically approved change requests, should flow throughout the system. And so when you submit a change request and it gets processed for approval or denial, it goes through the perform integrated change control process. That's a monitor and control process in the integration knowledge area. Okay, once it's approved, okay, approved change request is actually an output of perform integrated change control. Once it's approved, it should go right back into execution. Okay, we've got this change approved. We need to update software. We need to, change the scope. We need to modify the budget. So now we're actually going to execute that change. We're going to do the work to, to implement the change. And that takes place in direct and managed project work. Now that's another integrated process. You'll notice that the first 3 are all integrated processes because change requests should consider all of the knowledge areas below, right? For a change request to get approved, we have to take into account the scope, the quality, the resources, the procurement process, communication, stakeholder engagement. So all of the change processing happens in that integration knowledge area at the very top. Once it goes through direct and managed project work, then it's validated through control quality. And so again, control quality is about process. It's about quality inspections, right? So this is where the team actually tests the change, and they're actually, trying to see if it meets specifications, if it meets compliance requirements, because again, this is a new thing that they're having to execute on. Once they get the verified deliverable from control quality, meaning that it's passed the inspection, it's passed the test, then it goes into validate scope. And that's where the customer, right, accepts the deliverable. And so if you're looking at the process grid, and I can try to open it very quickly here just to give you all a visual of this process. If you're looking at the process grid, change takes place here, right? Perform integrated change control. This is where you get your approved change request. Once it's approved, it goes back through direct and managed project work because again, it has to be executed on, right? It has to be done. After that, it goes to control quality. So does this deliverable, this new change, pass internal inspections? Does it pass all of our compliance requirements? Does it pass all of the specifications that it needs to meet? Once it's verified here, then it goes through validate scope. And again, validate scope is when the customer now comes in and says, okay, that works for me, or no, we need to do more work. And of course, after that, the project's closed. Okay, so again, take another screenshot of this. Make sure that you're familiar with this workflow because you will get some questions about the change process, and you'll want to know which step you're in so that you know what to do next logically for the question. Okay, I know that was a tough one. Any questions about that before we move on to the last one? All right, last question has to do with formulas. And if you've been following my LinkedIn or attended any of my webinars, you know that I do not spend a whole lot of time on formulas because it's just not a big part of the test anymore. PMI has removed a lot of the math, so there's no need for a calculator, no need for scratch paper. But you may still get a math question like this. And so I'm going to show you how you can attack this question without having to pull out a calculator or getting anxiety about having to do any math on the test. Let's read through this one. I want you to drop your answer in the chat again, and then I'll walk through how you can figure this out. So during a committee meeting, the project sponsor asked for a brief update on current project performance. She is aware of previous delays and cost overruns, but needs a quick status summary for an upcoming board meeting. And at this point in the phase, the team had planned to complete $200,000 of work, but the earned value shows $180,000 of work completed, and actual costs have reached $225,000. So how is the project performing? Is it over budget, behind schedule, under budget, ahead of schedule, neither, both? And if you're completely just lost by this question, let me know. I don't know. Just say I don't know in the chat, and that's okay. Okay, John goes with A, both over budget and behind schedule. Nice. Any others? Any other brave souls want to take a stab at it? That's a very honest answer. I always hated word problems growing up. I never understood why word problems have to be a part of math. Like, is this English or is this math, right? All right, so let's go ahead and talk through. John, you hit the nail on the head there. The project is both over budget and behind schedule. Now, John, are you interested in sharing how you thought about this question, or should I just dive right in?
Yeah, I can share because first it's the team had planned to complete $200,000 worth of work, and the costs have already reached 225. So you know that you're over budget.
Exactly. Yep.
And then they're planning to reach 200, but the value only shows 180. That tells me they're behind schedule.
That's exactly right. Thank you very much, John. As John said, anytime you see the word planned value, they're talking about scheduling. They're talking about time. They're basically saying, let's say we had a project that lasts 10 days and it's going to cost us $100,000. Well, by day 5, which is the middle of the project, we should have earned at least $50,000 worth of work, right? We should have completed a group of tasks that was worth $50,000 worth of work. Well, if we're only earning $45,000, then we're behind schedule, right? Because we've only earned $45,000 worth of completed tasks. That's how you think about planned value and earned value. Planned value is a direct correlation to time and scheduling. And so just as John said, the team planned, right? There's that word planned. That means planned value. That means schedule. The team planned to complete $200,000 worth of work. The earned value, which is what they actually did on the project, shows 180 grand, right? So that means that they're behind the ball. They're supposed to be here, but they're actually here. Same amount of time has passed. So they're a little bit behind schedule. And then if the planned value is $200,000 work and the actual costs, this is where we're switching over into the budget, the actual costs have exceeded that, then we're over budget, right? We should have been here halfway through the project, right? We should have spent this much, but we've actually spent this much. So we're way over budget in this case. That's how I want you guys to think about that. Don't think that you have to get a calendar. Just look at the numbers, look at the terms like earned value, planned value, actual costs, right? To figure out if this is a cost question or a schedule question. And then just compare the numbers. Are they higher? Are they lower? Are they about the same? And that should give you a good indication of how your project is performing. If you get a question that involves indexes like 1.2 or 0.89, which is something that PMI loves to do, then just use this trick, okay? When it comes to CPI, which is Cost Performance Index, or SPI, which is Schedule Performance Index, again, 2 terms that you will probably see on the exam. In either of those cases, 1 usually means that you're on track, right? We're smooth sailing. The project is performing like we thought it would. No major flaws, no major hiccups. So if one is on track, then if we're below one, right? If the number is 0.9 or 0.92 or 0.75, that means that you are not where you're supposed to be. So you're either over budget, right? You're spending way too much money, or the project is behind schedule. Okay. So one is the bar. If you're below one, you're doing something bad. Okay. If you're above one, that means you're in a pretty good spot. You're either under budget, right? You're saving us money, or you're ahead of schedule. Okay. So just look at the numbers. If it's an index, remember one is on track, below one, bad, above one, good. That's all you need to know for the exam. Okay. That is all I have for you guys today. I hope that you learned something. I hope that you got some clarity somewhere along the way. If you guys have any questions, I'm happy to stay for a few minutes to chat through. If you would be so kind to leave a Google review, I'm just trying to build my reviews there on Google for CalThink. Just letting letting everyone know how the webinar was. If you learned something, that would be wonderful. If you're interested in coaching or if you want to take a look at the study guides, those are QR codes to take you directly to my website. Otherwise, thank you all for joining. I'll leave my contact info in the chat. That way you can just copy and paste. And I hope to see you all at the next webinar.